Hey, lovelies. It is time for part 2 of how to stop judging yourself. So, if you haven't heard part 1, you definitely want to check that out because this is all going to make a whole lot more sense. But for those of you who did watch the last session, remember we talked about why we judge and that it's instinctual. And it was designed to help you to stop beating up on yourself for judging yourself because it's all part of that threat detection mechanism at work, right? Remember how I mentioned that this whole judgment thing is layered like an onion, and we took off a layer last week, and this week we're going to remove another one. This session is another why, but we're going to come at it from a different angle, and we'll see how things go. Maybe I'll even share with you a personal story that's kind of related. Anyways, well, it can seem like there's a really annoyingly loud speaker inside your head that thinks it's Simon Cowell getting paid to judge and analyze and dissect and label everything. Telling it to stop isn't going to work. That voice still needs to be heard and acknowledged, and we're going to get into why. So that's why last week we talked about that threat detection mechanism. This week, we're going to go deeper into those judgments or the threats that are rooted in. And I find if I can understand why things happen, I have a much better chance in creating a lifelong shift in perspective. So I'm offering you the same strategy because I know just how crappy it feels. So let's get into it. Remember last week how I mentioned that none of those judgments that you have about yourself are your original thoughts? Remember that mama cat who teaches her kittens to use the litter box? We're the same. Our parents and society taught us their version of what's right and wrong, or in other words, what's safe and not safe. Now remember, that's a really important point to keep in mind as we go through, because we have adopted these interpretations, these perspectives, these judgments. And you know what that also means? If we adopt someone else's perspectives, we have to abandon our own if it's in conflict. In other words, we were young. We didn't have the capacity to objectively analyze why our parents were doing or saying whatever they were doing or saying. Rather, we accepted it as a more powerful truth than our own. After all, they're our first gods, right? So we assumed that since we relied on them to feed us and clothe us and keep us warm, they must know better than us what's safe and not safe, even when that went against what we believed about ourselves, even when it conflicted with our knowing about how perfect and whole and complete and wonderful, lovable beings that we are. Do you know what that means? It means that even though we had no ability to understand, that sometimes what they were talking about was their unresolved pain, and sometimes their fear was from their childhood, and sometimes their actions were not kind towards us, but we couldn't understand why. So we had to create assumptions. We had to connect these dots. Otherwise, there's like a misfire in our developing minds, and the dots need to be connected, even if it's inaccurate or not true about us. The brain doesn't like gaps. So it makes things up to fill those gaps, which means it can come up with some pretty inaccurate gap fillers. So our interpretations generally lead to demeaning or condescending perspectives of ourselves when we're connecting the dots about what somebody else is saying or doing that's in conflict with what we believe as children. Let me give you an example of how that worked with my little daughter, which does not make any logical sense to my adult brain. But not much makes logical sense when you're dealing with a highly influential, developing little mind, right? Okay, so after 10 years of being in a pretty unhealthy, emotionally and mentally ick kind of relationship, I finally got up the guts to call it quits. Now, we had 2 daughters together. And from what they shared with me, I didn't really think that either one of them would miss him because he was pretty MIA. He would, even when he was home, he would be out smoking in the garage or finding other things to do rather than spending time with the family for hours on end. So when we finally split up and he moved out, I was surprised to hear that my youngest daughter began to talk about killing herself and wanting to die at the age of 5. Yeah, so that's pretty crazy. And it scared me, right? So I was really, really surprised when this began to happen. And I was scared. I'm her mom, and I am pretty protective about that kind of stuff. No kid should even know about that, but there was definitely something there. And I knew as her mama, I had to get to the root cause to help her find relief. And thankfully, I was in the middle of becoming a certified Psych instructor. And in one of the sessions on surrogate healing, which is when you're taking on the energy of others to heal a memory or a pattern for them, what happened was our trainer had instructed us to find a partner to practice on. She said that, she would also need somebody in surrogate to work on, and asked if anybody had any troubling things going on in their families. So I told her about my sweet daughter, who is usually the comedian and the joy in the room, but had recently become very depressed and was expressing wishes to die at such a young age. So she took on my daughter's energy, and instantly she started sobbing. I was in the middle of helping my partner with their surrogate energy work, so I tried really hard not to be distracted, but my heart was breaking. Once we finished our practice session, she shared with me the deep sadness and heaviness my daughter was feeling, and she said it was rooted in a feeling of abandonment from her father leaving. I was blown away because I was the one who told him that he had to move out. So in my mind, I thought she would see me as the bad guy, but no. Her pain came from her perception of her father abandoning her. I was thankful that in that surrogate experience, she was able to release those deep-seated feelings for herself. Her sobs, which turned into yawns, which is another self-soothing stress mechanism. And when I tried to call her that evening, because she was staying at my mother-in-law's, once we were out of training, I found out she'd already gone to bed, 2 hours earlier than usual. She had drank an enormous amount of water. And excessive thirst is another sign of emotional healing, because it's the body's way of trying to flush out those feelings so they aren't stored in the cells. The body, honestly, is so truly magnificent. So this was an incredibly eye-opening experience for me to see just how powerful surrogate work is, and also how we as parents or adults might interpret things one way, but it may have a completely different meaning for the children who are also involved in being programmed in the first 7 years of their life. And obviously, neither her dad nor I had any intention of her feeling abandoned in any way. I was doing what I felt was going to be the best for us, so we had the freedom to grow and evolve past our current patterns. We are literally meaning-making machines, which means that when something doesn't make sense in what our parents or caregivers or authority figures do, our sweet little minds begin to believe that there's something wrong with us, because we can't fathom that there is something wrong with these gods of our lives that are so much bigger and louder and faster and smarter than us. We're literally in theta hypnosis state until the age of 7. So we're incredibly easy to program. And then guess what happens? As adults, we keep reliving the first 7 years of our lives on repeat. All those unresolved issues just keep on occurring. Yikes, hey? So that's why no matter what you do to distract yourself, what addictions to social media scrolling, Netflix binge watching, shopping, drinking, smoking, or what pills that you take, those feelings of not good enough, of not deserving, not worthy, not smart enough, whatever it is for you, it keeps popping up relentlessly. Here's the magic though, and it honestly is magical. This is the universe's way of trying to get your attention by causing you so much frustration and annoyance over the incessantness of it. Isn't that ingenious? I call them holding patterns, and it's like flying in circles, waiting to land, but you can't because you haven't got permission to yet. And even though your arms are tired and you're running out of gas, can anybody relate? Oh my goodness, I get you. I've been there. There's a way out. So to create a landing strip, what you want to do is start to look below the surface. And when you connect the dots, you start asking yourself, when was the first memory of this? It is always linked back to childhood. What experience did you interpret as something is wrong with you. It doesn't matter if it makes sense now as an adult or not. It made sense then, and that is what was programmed. And that is still the programming that is running. So logical or not, it's valid. You see, my daughter would have gone her whole life thinking she's not good enough to keep people from abandoning her if we hadn't caught it early on. But unfortunately, we don't have all have those people doing surrogate energy healing work for us, right? In our childhood. So these interpretations, they get created and they continue to live out that holding pattern regardless of what job we get into. We find ourselves dealing with similar bosses, or in relationships we keep dating the same kind of person, or in our finances we keep butting up against the same experience. So when you see this repeating pattern in any area of your life, know this. Number one, it's an unresolved issue from your childhood. Number two, the universe is trying to get your attention so you can finally resolve it. And number three, the landing strip is created when you can begin to connect the dots and you can see when this interpretation was first invented in your world in childhood. Because in order to live a fuller life and feel comfortable with who you are, you need to accept your awesomeness, even if it doesn't match up with what others around you think is awesome. Someone out there does think that your idea aligns with what is amazing for you, but it might not be the people who you surround yourself with, or your partner, or your family, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong because you can't be their version of awesome. The fact is that you're here on Earth, and that in itself is astronomically rare. You are literally a walking, talking miracle. You know, when you feel like you're up against all these limits and frustration and things that are struggling with and you're annoyed with, you're not doing yourself any favors. Those feelings are a signal that you have gotten detached from your eternal guidance mechanism. And we'll get more into that next week. But when you begin to live your life with a series of wouldas, shouldas, couldas, you're limiting your whole experience. Because when you think about your past, you just end up repeating it rather than moving forwards. And that is all that judgment is. You reliving your past. You recreating more of it in the now. I know that's not what you want. So for this week, I invite you to notice your holding patterns and appreciate that it's happening to get your attention. And you know why? It's because it wants you to see just how magnificent you are. That's the universe's plan. And when you're not seeing it and you're stuck in all that mucky, judgy, inaccurate thoughts about yourself, these are just like clouds, and you are the sunshine. And all of those limiting things that you have decided to believe about yourself are the clouds covering up your brilliance. But you are here, and you're hearing this message because it's time for you to shine. And that little bit of hope that you're feeling right now is your inner child getting excited because you're finally reconnecting to the truth of who you are. It's so exciting. So I invite you to ask yourself, number one, how would it feel to feel accepted? And number two, what can I do to accept myself more? So like I said, you can do this work alone. You absolutely can. I believe in you. Just by seeing the patterns, being thankful for it, being brought to your attention so you can finally resolve it and stop reliving it. But for those of you who need some one-on-one help, I'm definitely here. I put my website below so that you can book a private session if you need. But if anybody has any questions, man, I would love for you to put those into the comments. And I just want you to know that next week, you don't want to miss part 3, which would be another layer, another tool that's going to help you to stop judging because it keeps on creating momentum as we go through these layers. I want you to remember just how magnificent you are. So much love, and remember, you really are the magnificent creator of your own life.